and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth met with President Lee Jae-myung and South Korea's Defense Chief An Kyu-baek in Seoul and reaffirmed President Donald Trump's earlier approval for South Korea to acquire a nuclear-powered submarine, saying the United States will fully support the program. South Korea's spy agency says North Korea has shown multiple signs of preparing for potential dialogue with the United States, and added that it sees a joint military exercise between Seoul and Washington in March as a turning point in potential talks. Meanwhile, the U.S. has newly imposed sanctions on North Korean bankers accused of laundering stolen cryptocurrency. Starting today, the National Assembly will begin reviewing next year's budget proposal laid out by President Lee Jae-myung, which allocates a large amount to artificial intelligence and research and development. South Korea's intelligence agency is now offering new insight into Pyongyang's diplomatic movements, pointing to subtle shifts that indicate North Korea's preparation for potential dialogue with the United States. Our Muniran starts us off.
Though an anticipated U.S.-North Korea summit encounter at the APEC leaders' meeting ultimately failed to materialize, South Korea's spy agency says Pyongyang had been quietly positioning itself for the possibility. According to briefings delivered during the National Assembly's audit of the National Intelligence Service on Tuesday, North Korea showed multiple signs of preparing for potential dialogue with Washington behind the scenes, even as it remained publicly unresponsive to repeated overtures. The NIS confirmed indications that Pyongyang had been adjusting its diplomatic posture, including Kim Jong-un's deliberate restraint from making provocative remarks on nuclear armament, to avoid antagonizing the United States. The agency also cited North Korea's efforts to analyze the policy stances of U.S. officials handling North Korea affairs and to gather information on influential figures in Washington as evidence of quiet preparation.
Although the APEC-related summit did not happen, various channels have confirmed that North Korea had been preparing behind the scenes for dialogue with the United States. The NIS believes Kim Jong-un intends to engage in talks and will seek contact once conditions are met.
The agency also sees early next year as a potential turning point. With the South Korea-U.S. joint military exercises scheduled for March, the NIS says that period could determine whether high-level talks, possibly even at a summit level, become feasible.
We expect and judge the possibility to be quite high that U.S.-North Korea relations could improve next year, even advancing to a summit-level meeting. After the 9th Party Congress, another military parade, and the joint exercises in March, there may be an appropriate moment to explore or sense the possibility depending on how circumstances unfold.
As for Kim Jong-un's health, long a subject of speculation, the NIS reported no major abnormalities, saying he appears to be carrying out both provincial and Pyongyang-based activities without difficulty. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Washington has announced new sanctions on North Korean bankers and institutions for laundering money to fund Pyongyang's weapons program. The move comes as the U.S. President Donald Trump says sanctions would remain a key part of the dialogue with North Korea. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
The United States has announced new sanctions on individuals and institutions accused of helping North Korea launder billions of dollars stolen through cybercrime operations. According to the U.S. Treasury Department on Tuesday, 8 people and 2 firms are being sanctioned for channeling money from cyber heists and IT fraud to finance North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Among those sanctioned are North Korean bankers Chang Guk-chul and Heo Jung-sun, who allegedly managed more than $5 million in cryptocurrency connected to the sanctioned First Credit Bank. Washington says over the past 3 years, North Korean hackers have stolen and laundered more than $3 billion in digital assets, the largest amount linked to any foreign actor. U.S. Treasury Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence John K. Hurley said the regime's hackers steal and launder money to fund nuclear development. The department said the network operates across China, Russia, and other countries, using shell companies and foreign banks to disguise the source of funds. The latest sanctions come as U.S. President Donald Trump said sanctions would remain a key part of any dialogue with Pyongyang. After the collapse of a possible U.S.-North Korea summit during Trump's recent visit to Asia, Washington moved quickly to expand sanctions, signaling stronger pressure on the regime. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And South Korea's Defense Minister An Gyu-baek and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth held their annual security talks on Tuesday. A joint communique was not released, but they did tap into ways to boost defense ties. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
The South Korean and U.S. defense chiefs reaffirmed the steadfastness of the ROK-U.S. alliance during their annual security talks, the 57th Security Consultative Meeting on Tuesday. A joint communique was not released, waiting for a joint fact sheet for the two countries to come out first. Still, Defense Minister An Gyu-baek and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did share some parts of the discussion they had during the meeting. Regarding the nuclear-powered submarines, which Trump recently gave approval to, the Pentagon vowed support across its departments.
We're going to work closely with the Department of State and the Department of Energy to fulfill President Trump's commitment in a deliberate manner. And I think it's a reflection of something I said, that the President wants allies to be strong.
Noting that South Korea is a model ally, Hegseth said he was encouraged by South Korea's commitment to increase defense spending and make greater investments in ROK military capabilities. To modernize the alliance and boost ties, the two allies agreed on some practical steps, including having U.S. warships be repaired in South Korea to ensure their most lethal capability remains ready to respond to any crisis. As to whether the U.S. forces Korea could be used against China in the Taiwan Strait, U.S. Defense Chief underlined the importance of flexibility, but said the USFK is oriented to protect South Korea from the north.
There's no doubt, flexibility for regional contingencies is something we would take a look at, but we are focused on standing by our allies here and ensuring the threat of the DPRK is not a threat to the Republic of Korea, and certainly continue to extend nuclear deterrence as we have before.
The comment resonates with the two defense chiefs' earlier visit to the joint security area within the demilitarized zone on Monday for the first time in 8 years. Meanwhile, when asked about whether South Korea hopes to pursue nuclear weapons development, Minister An clearly said this was not possible.
South Korea is part of the NPT, so it's not allowed to have nuclear weapons. Therefore, developing nuclear weapons in South Korea would not be possible.
He further added that because South Korea cannot possess nuclear weapons, the Combined Nuclear and Conventional Integration System, integrating U.S. nuclear capabilities with South Korea's conventional weapons, has been established. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
So U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has now wrapped up his two-day visit to South Korea yesterday after meeting President Lee Jae-myung and Seoul's defense chief An Gyu-baek. For more on this, we're joined today by Professor Kim Do-soo, professor at the Division of International and Area Studies at Pugyong National University. Professor Kim, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
So now that U.S. President Donald Trump has, authorized South Korea to have a nuclear-powered submarine, the U.S. Defense Secretary has promised full support for the program. What does this mean for South Korea's security? And some say it's impossible to build this in the United States. What's your take on this assessment?
The statement by Pete Hegseth that the U.S. fully supports Republic of Korea's move to acquire nuclear-powered submarine signals a significant shift for Korean defense policy. Indeed, only a tiny group of countries operate nuclear-powered submarines: U.S., U.K., France, Russia, China, and India. Australia is on track under AUKUS, but not yet operational. So South Korea is becoming seventh or eighth. It means that South Korea possesses a kind of elite strategic capability status. Nuclear powered submarines stay submerged for months. They are much quieter, harder to detect. They enable long-range missions into deep Pacific and Indian Oceans. Therefore, South Korea can shift for peninsular defense to blue water, long-range power projection. They can represent South Korea's top-tier military technology, and it raises both strategic opportunities and practical complications. In a word, the authorization is a kind of game changer in South Korea's naval and strategic posture. Also, it was announced that the submarines will be built at the U.S. shipyard, specifically cited as the Hanwha Pili shipyard in Philadelphia. The problem is that it is fundamentally a commercial shipbuilding yard, not a dedicated nuclear submarine yard. So converting it for nuclear-powered submarines would be too expensive and technically challenging. Therefore, I believe that the original plan is likely to be changed to some extent as it is being executed.
I see. And another thing that Hegseth also discussed here in South Korea was the issue of transferring wartime operational control. He discussed that while he was meeting with President Lee Jae-myung. The president hopes to sort this out before the end of his 5-year term. How do you think this issue will play out in the future?
The U.S. and South Korea reaffirmed their commitment to the conditions-based OPCON transition. They agreed to continue evaluation of whether South Korea meets the required command and control and defense readiness conditions. They emphasized alliance deterrence must not weaken during the transition. Washington highlighted that the process must remain conditions-based, not political calendar-based. In a word, the SCM reaffirmed the goal, but produced no tangible progress. OPCON transfer remains slow, cautious, and firmly condition-based, despite Seoul's national and political urgency.
Right. And Professor Kim, as to whether the U.S. military forces could be used against China in the Taiwan Strait, Hegseth stressed the importance of flexibility. What are your thoughts on this?
Hegseth's emphasis on flexibility regarding the use of U.S. forces Korea in a Taiwan contingency has huge implications. In U.S. strategic language, flexibility equals redeployability, which means that while USFK's primary mission remains deterrence on the Korean Peninsula, Washington wants the option to use the U.S. forces based in Korea to respond elsewhere in the region if necessary, most notably in a Taiwan Strait crisis. His remark is a reflection of U.S. perception that USFK is part of a regional U.S. posture, not a Korea-only force. It also signals that the U.S. wants South Korea to contribute more to the defense against North Korea and the regional stability.
I see. That sounds pretty concerning. We'll have to see how that plays out. All right, Professor Kim, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Starting today, the National Assembly will begin reviewing the Lee administration's budget proposal for next year. President Lee Jae-myung laid out details of the plan at Parliament on Tuesday, calling for bipartisan support to boost spending on artificial intelligence as the country seeks new growth engines. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
The focus of the 2026 budget proposal was on seeking new growth engines, with President Lee Jae-myung calling it the very first budget to open up the era of AI.
국제 무역 통상 질서의 재편과 인공지능 대전환의 파도 앞에서 국가 생존을 모색해야 할 절체절명의 위기에 처해 있습니다. 이제는 인공지능 시대의 고속도로를 구축해서 도약과 성장의 새로운 미래를 열어야 합니다.
The government has projected a record high of 728 trillion won, or over $508 billion for next year's budget, up 8% from this year. Nearly $7 billion has been earmarked for AI-related projects, 3 times higher than this year's spending, with a focus on physical AI and use of the technology in robots and automobiles. Next year's defense spending will be expanded by more than 8%, worth over $46 billion, with more use of AI by the defense forces, as the commander-in-chief called for self-reliant defense.
전 세계 5위의 군사력으로 평가받는 우리 대한민국이 국방을 외부에 의존한다는 것은 우리 국민의 자존심 문제 아니겠습니까?
Other areas of focus were on the R&D budget, which will be a record high, as well as the so-called National Growth Fund, NK Culture. He also vowed to secure a social safety net and help small business owners through local consumption coupons. And looking back on last week's diplomatic super week, the president said uncertainties over the economy have been eased by reaching a trade deal with the U.S. As the president called for across-the-aisle collaboration, speaking before a 2/3 full Congress, following a boycott by the main opposition People Power Party over an arrest warrant against its party member.
좀 허전하군요.
The mood was starkly contrasting as the ruling Democratic Party lawmakers responded to the president with rounds of applause. The legal deadline for the parliamentary budget review is set for December 2nd. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
In other news, South Korea's foreign reserves climbed for the 5th straight month in October, reaching the highest level in 33 months. According to the Bank of Korea on Wednesday, the nation's reserves stood at $428.82 billion at the end of October, up $6.8 billion from the previous month. It's the highest level since January 2023, when reserves hit nearly $430 billion. The central bank attributed the increase to stronger investment returns and new foreign currency-denominated foreign exchange stabilization bonds. As of the end of September, South Korea ranked 9th worldwide in foreign reserve holdings. Emmy Award-winning professor Sam Richards delivered a lecture in Seoul on Tuesday, titled Living in Korea, Seeing the World Differently. The lecture, attended by foreign students living in South Korea, explored how life in the country can broaden their perspectives and discussed the importance of adapting to Korean society by learning the language and understanding its culture. The talk was part of the 30 Days in Seoul program, which helps foreign students adjust to life in South Korea through hands-on experiences with K-culture and career support opportunities.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In Israel on Tuesday, authorities said they received the remains of what is believed to be a dead hostage from Gaza under the U.S. brokered ceasefire that began last month. Officials said the coffin was transferred via the Red Cross in Gaza and taken to Israel's National Forensic Center in Tel Aviv for identification. If confirmed, it would leave 7 deceased hostages still in Gaza. The transfer follows earlier body returns on Sunday and last Thursday. Under the deal, 20 living and 28 deceased hostages were to be returned within 72 hours. All living hostages were freed on 13th of October in exchange for 250 prisoners and 1,718 detainees. Israel has also handed over the bodies of 270 Palestinians in previous exchanges linked to the truce. Authorities say coordination with the Red Cross will continue to identify and recover remaining bodies while the ceasefire remains in place. In the Philippines on Tuesday, Typhoon Kalmaegi left at least 46 people dead and forced hundreds of thousands from their homes as floods swept through Cebu and other provinces. Entire towns on Cebu are underwater and casualties expected to rise despite almost 400,000 people being moved out of the path of the typhoon. A military helicopter sent for relief efforts also crashed on Mindanao Island, killing 6 crew members. The storm, locally named Tino, has weakened since landfall early Tuesday, but still brings winds over 80 miles per hour and is forecast to move into the South China Sea by Wednesday. In the United States, former Vice President Dick Cheney, one of Washington's most influential and divisive figures, has died at the age of 84. Cheney's family said he passed away on Monday from complications of pneumonia and heart disease. Cheney served under President George W. Bush and was widely seen as the driving force behind America's war on terror after the 9/11 attacks. Critics accuse him of shaping policies that led to the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, the use of torture, and expanded surveillance of U.S. citizens. Before the White House, Cheney held senior government roles, including Defense Secretary under George H.W. Bush, and he later served as CEO of Halliburton. A statement from his family described Cheney as a man of courage, honor, and love for country. In Los Angeles, Hollywood stars gathered on Saturday night for the 2025 LACMA Art and Film Gala, raising $6.5 million for the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Presented by Gucci and co-chaired by Leonardo DiCaprio and Eva Chow, the gala honored Black Panther director Ryan Coogler and artist Mary Kors for shaping modern culture. Guests filled the museum grounds as Doja Cat sparked the night with a high-energy set. LACMA's director Michael Govan hailed it as a, quote, celebration of creativity that can only happen in Los Angeles.
We are in for more beautiful late autumn weather today, one of the most pleasant times to be outdoors and enjoy nature. After a chilly start, it will warm up quickly again, so the morning jacket might feel too warm in the afternoon, but once the sun goes down, we'll need that jacket again. So this huge daily temperature swing means that immunity can drop easily. Given the recent spike in cold cases, please take extra care with your personal hygiene and health management. This afternoon, highs will soar by over 10 degrees Celsius. Seoul topping out at 18 degrees Celsius, Gyeongju at 20 degrees, Busan 22 under sunny skies nationwide. This clear, dry, and high temperature gap pattern will continue for the time being. Make sure to dress accordingly and make the most of this fine autumn weather while you can.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.